I'm Mary Owens with Owens Estate and Wealth Strategy Group. Thank you for joining us for our economic update for spring of 2018. We're going to start with the area of most interest. Usually that is the United States employment and job creation. So this first slide that we're looking at is the U.S. unemployment rate, known as U3. Currently, it is at 4.1%. Now, this number, you have to realize, is reaching a historical low. Our lowest period of U.S. unemployment on the U3 index actually came in April of 2000, when it went down to 3.8%. So this number is by far the best number we've seen in over a decade. Now, to understand what's in U3, we need to have a little discussion about how you're counted and how you get in this number. You are in U3 if you are 100% unemployed. That means you're not even working an hour a week. It also means you are actively looking for a job. You can't say, no, I've given up, and if one comes, I'll actually take it. You must be actively looking for a job. Number 3, you have to be available to work, which means if you have a disability that doesn't allow you to work, you're not in U3. So there is a difference between what is reported in the paper and what I'm about to explain in U6. U3 is the broad-based measure of those who are fully available for work and are actively looking for work. So the next measure of U.S. unemployment rate is known as U6. U6 is usually not reported in the paper. Now, U6 is measured differently than U3. If you are working part-time, you are counted in U6. So, for example, if you're working 20 hours a week and you wish to work 40, you will actually be counted as a half a person in U6. Now, U6 is right now stands at 8%. This isn't the lowest measure we've had, but it is nearing the lowest measure. The lowest U6 unemployment rate we've had in the United States was actually in October of 2000, and that was 6.8%. So we're only 1.2% away from the lowest U6 ever reported. Now, to add to this, though, there's an interesting dynamic here that we should understand. We're actually seeing people return to the workforce that had previously given up. They were no longer counted in U3 or U6. And that return to the workforce is indicative of a growing economy. And what surprises me and pleases me, as we're seeing millions return to the workforce, the U6 unemployment rate isn't going up, which means those people who are returning to the workforce are being absorbed into the workforce. This is very positive for the U.S. economy. That means those new returnees are off of welfare and other federal assistance programs, but now they're contributing to both the Social Security base and the U.S. income tax base as well. So all is well in the U.S. unemployment arena. It looks very, very positive. Now, if we move on to some of the other areas that are important relative to employment and are reflective in the areas of the United States, we need to turn to real estate, because a fully employed society likes to buy houses. So we do have some displacement in the U.S. real estate market right now. So the slide I'm showing now is U.S. new home sales versus U.S. existing home sales. It is an indication of a tight real estate market if new home sales are substantially lower than existing. And why? It's an indication we're not building very many houses, and demand is outpacing what we're actually building. So let's look at this slide that compares U.S. new home sales to U.S. existing home sales from 1963 to present. The black line at this one is the U.S. home sales, existing home sales. It is substantially higher than new home sales, and this disconnect started in about 2008. Since 2008 and the financial crisis, we have been underbuilding new homes relative to the population growth, and it is showing up in this slide and several others that I'll be presenting shortly. So the next one I'd like you to look at is the U.S. ownership rate. Now, it hit an all-time high just before the financial crisis. We are all aware what caused that. We had too lax of lending standards, and too many people bought homes they truly could not afford, and then subsequently lost them. So we hit almost the bottom of the barrel on ownership rates for decades when it came to about 2010 through 12, and we're now beginning to pick back up. So right now we are at a U.S. home ownership rate of 64.2%. It's better, it's improving, but I suspect it's going to go a lot higher in the future. So let's look at some of the structural issues we have in the United States and what's causing what I call displacement in the U.S. real estate market. The number one issue that is first starting to U.S. home being built is relative to not just U.S. homes, it's all structures. On this slide in front of you, we have put up the number of U.S. structures built by decade. And strangely enough, we have the largest, youngest population we have ever had in the United States right now, but since 2010, we've only built a fraction of new structures as we have relative to previous decades. This is going to cause a further real estate displacement in the form of higher home prices and a stretch to the American middle class budget. We need to fix this problem, and it is easily fixable. So let's look at some of the other issues that are impacting real estate. When we look at real estate, U.S. homes are usually built proportional to people entering what's called the household formation range. Household formation is the single most important economic driver of any capitalistic society. We have right now two massive egg and the snake generations that are either just entering household formation, which is known as the millennials. They started late because of the economic crisis. And right behind them is known as Generation Z, or as I call them more fondly, the digital natives. Millennials are 87 million people. The Gen Zs are over 90 million people. We have over 177 million people that are going to be in household formation for the next 25 years. That's over half of the United States population. The demand for housing is going to radically increase in the future. Now, when we look at this slide, I also want you to look at some of the dynamics that have impacted our economy as well, not just real estate, but our economy in general. Now, the last massive, what I call egg and the snake generation that hit the United States was the baby boomers. They were born from 1946 through 1964. They hit household formation in about 1980 en masse. They started a bit late because of the Vietnam War. They finally came home, went back to school, used their GI Bill, and all at once, the United States in the 80s couldn't build enough houses. Housing prices skyrocketed even though we were at a very high period in the U.S. economy of building new structures. But there were so many baby boomers they couldn't keep up. Now, baby boomers at that point were an extremely high percentage of the U.S. population, but in total, they were only about 80 million at their height. The group we're now talking about, millennials and Gen Zers, who, by the way, that generation is still expanding, we're at 177 million people. So when we look at the number of structures that need to be built, it's more than twice what we're probably going to need with the baby boomers. So what's happening right now in the U.S. real estate? Our U.S. existing home sales inventory is at historical lows. We have at this point 1,590,000 homes for sale in the United States as of February. That is not enough. Our average is about 2.5. And that average was created when populations were far smaller and the number of people in household formations was half. This population, this actual inventory needs to more than double to keep prices moderate. Now, as you can see, since we aren't building inventory, the U.S. median house price is continuing to rise significantly. What we also have is U.S. housing starts are subnormal. They're lower than historical standards. They are improving. But remember, we had historical standards that are high based on 80 million people hitting household formation. We have over 170 million as it is right now. So even if we got back to normal standards, that's not enough houses. So a lot of people are saying, well, we can't have people that can afford a home because they're so far in debt. That's absolutely not true. The household debt service ratio right now, as of December of 2017, is near historical lows. The lowest period we ever had was 9.9% of disposable income. Right now, it's only about 10.3%. We are actually seeing that millennials, this latest generation, are savers. They're afraid of debt. They don't want to take on excess financial obligations. So they are actually in a very good position to buy homes. Far better than the previous generation, because the Gen Xers were the ones that were encouraged to get into homes they couldn't afford, and they were the ones that had the financial issues that destroyed their credit more than any other generation we've had since the Great Depression. So what are some of the issues that causing why we can't get more homes built? And as an economist, this is very frustrating to me. The United States right now could be entering into one of the largest and greatest periods of economic expansion we've had since the 80s. And there is one piece of legislation, in my view, that is the absolute anchor keeping us in port instead of getting that economic engine revved up. And that's the Dodd-Frank Act that was passed in 2010. Now, I won't go into a lot of the detail, but there are some of the areas I want you to be aware of that have been very negatively impacting our economy because of this act. Number one, this act radically reduced the amount of loans that medium and small size banks could make to businesses, and in particular, those businesses that were most impacted negatively were small real estate developers. Those that build houses around 100 to 200 because they can't get loans from traditional sources. That is a large impact, and why we're not building enough homes in rural America is because the home builders that build in rural America can't get loans. And secondly, we also had a revision to the home qualification standards that went too far. We were actually too lax from about 2002 on, and now we're too harsh. If we would return to the historical standards we had for over 50 years, I think it would help dramatically to be able to ease the housing shortage we're experiencing right now in the United States. Rural areas are impacted far more than the big cities. So let's move on to some other major economic indicators today. We have several. The first one I want to show you is our leading economic indicators in the United States. That couldn't look sweeter. I have not seen such positive economic indicators at this level since about 1980. So why am I comparing now to 1980? 1980 was the last time we had the massive generation hitting household formation. We are in a similar economic pattern right now as we were in 1980, and we had 19 years of strong growth. So what about our federal deficit? That right now is a concern to many of us. Well, as our GDP grows, we have the opportunity to reduce the deficit spending as a percentage of gross domestic product. So it is improving. We're now spending 3.4% negative deficit spending relative to GDP. I'd like to see that get down to 1. The historical standard is spend no more than the inflationary rate or just slightly less. Our inflation in the United States right now is about 2.5%. It varies a little bit from month to month. So we're still spending about 1% more as a negative deficit spending as a percentage of gross domestic product than we should be. This can be fixed, especially if we have sustained economic growth in the future. Now, let's talk about some really important long-term drivers of economic growth. Household formation is extremely important, but growth in the working age population is equally important. Now, we have two sources of increasing the workforce. We have native-born United citizens, and then we have immigrants. Now, up on this chart, it is showing in the past where we have had growth in the working age population. So in the past, the overwhelming vast majority has been native-born. Now, I am a firm believer in allowing immigration. As an economist, if we did not have immigration, I do believe the United States would be in a long, deep recession or even possibly a depression. But as you're going to see also, I also firmly believe in legal immigration because it does impact our workforce dramatically if we have legal versus illegal. So the first thing I want you to see here is how long-term drivers of economic growth work. There are two major elements. One is the growth in the number of workers, which we are going to see a dramatic increase coming in the next 10 years because right now over half of the Gen Zers or digital natives are not yet old enough to work, and that is our largest generation. But the other issue that's equally, if not more important, is the productivity of those workers as they enter the workforce. And that is known as the growth in the real output per worker. And the United States, that number is rapidly dropping. We are not getting an increase in productivity in this new workforce because so many of these younger generation and the new immigrants do not have the proper education or the skills that we need to actually become more productive. So that's going to be a challenge to the U.S. educational system to be able to bring these young people up to speed and to be able to competitively work in a workforce and be globally competitive. So when we talk about globally competitiveness, let's move on right now to the world economics and compare it with the United States. So the first thing I'd like to show is the U.S. international unemployment rate. Now please notice the United States right now, comparative to most countries, has an unusually low unemployment rate. This is wonderful. 5 years ago, it was the absolute opposite. We are among some of the highest in the world. Now, the areas might surprise you, though, where we still have systemic long-term unemployment that doesn't seem to be improving. And a lot of it actually is in Europe, Spain in particular. Spain simply cannot seem to get out of its malaise of its poor economic activity. Brazil, because of the oil crisis. Italy is still struggling, so is France. The euro area in general is still over 8%. Now, Canada's unemployment is beginning to come down because oil prices are coming back. But as you can see, United States, the only areas that we have in the world that have lower unemployment, China, South Korea, Germany, Mexico, and Japan. Now, many of those areas, the unemployment rate is artificially kept low by policy. Ours is not. So we're unemployment-wise, the United States is looking wonderful relative to other countries. Now, our U.S. GDP right now is changing. If you'll look at that chart carefully, you'll notice that spending, which is the light blue, seems to always pop every Christmas. That's not really a surprise, which means it's also going to decrease the first quarter of every year after Christmas when everyone is in sticker shock getting their credit card bills. So this quarter's no different than any other first quarter. Our consumer spending went down. But is most interesting about this is the amount of imports the United States is having is going down. We're beginning to actually be less dependent on imports, and that's good because that means those products are being made in the United States and being made by a U.S. worker. Now, our growth is beginning to still go up on GDP. Very positive. The euro area is also going up, but they're beginning to flatten. And if it was not for Germany, they already would be going down. The UK has been dramatically hit in their GDP because of the desire for Brexit. And we're going to revisit this later in another economic update. Theresa May has her hands full. Recently, we've had the members of Parliament announce that if she does not effectuate a Brexit deal that they like, they may override her. So there's going to be a lot of instability and insecurity in Brexit in the next year or so to come. Spain's GDP is improved, but it isn't at this point improving anymore. So they still have a high unemployment rate, and they're going to need to do something to rev up their economy. France is beginning to finally grow. Germany is probably the strongest capitalistic society right now on the planet. They have a very effective workforce. They have one of the most highly trained, educated workforces in the world, and it is reflective in their economic stability. Italy is beginning to grow, but still is well under 2%. Canada is improving because of oil prices. A predominant export of Canada, the number one, is oil. Mexico is slowing. That is a reflection of U.S. manufacturing is increasing. Saudi Arabia, who caused the oil crisis starting in November of 2014, they now are smaller as a percentage of world oil supply than they've been ever. So they are now trying to recover from poor policy decisions. Russia is beginning to grow a little bit, but recently has slowed significantly. And I want to point out here, when Russia's economic policies and economic growth starts to slow, we have a situation where Russia becomes more unstable and becomes more aggressive historically. So my eye right now is on Russia. That does concern me. If they slip back into a depression, that will not be good. Brazil is beginning to recover. Again, that's oil. Venezuela, the hardest hit country, it has been devastated. We are in a humanitarian crisis right now in Brazil. There is not enough currency reserves for the country even to buy a food for even a third of the population. Venezuela is still in a full crisis mode, and I don't see it ending anytime soon. Japan is in just what their normal is, slow, steady growth. And India is still, by far, the fastest growing country in the world on GDP. It exceeds China, and their numbers are actually believable. Please remember, every time I see China, I say, don't believe what they report. We really do not believe that China's GDP is still at 6.3%. We believe it's closer to about 5%. It's still growing, but certainly at rates far less than they have been reporting. So thank you for being with us for our economic update. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or call us. Our email and telephone are on the screen, and thank you so much for being with us. You have a good day.